Welcome to the Parliament of South Australia. My name's Natalie and I manage our education and engagement programs here at Parliament House, and I'm going to be taking you through the building today. Before we start any of our programs, the first thing we do is acknowledge country. So I acknowledge that Parliament House stands on Kaurna land, and I acknowledge the Kaurna people as the traditional owners of the land that we're on here today. I also recognise that Parliament extends well beyond these walls through its members of Parliament, so I acknowledge all of the traditional owners of the sacred land in our state. We're quite lucky to be starting on the outside of the building here today, because on our tours we're usually always on the inside, so I can point out some of the special features that we have on the building exterior. And one of the things that's special about our Parliament House is the building materials are sourced from within South Australia. So the marble that is featured on the building is sourced from near Kapunda, and the granite that is featured throughout the rest of the building comes from Granite Island at Victor Harbour. So we're very lucky that we've got this beautiful building using locally sourced materials. Another feature that's quite unique on the exterior are carved faces above the windows. They're keystones above the windows, and those carved faces are former speakers and governors of South Australia, and they reflect the older side of the building, the part of the building that was constructed in the 1800s. Those faces, we had a lot more money to carve them in the 1800s, so they're prominent on the side of the building that was built first. But on the other side of the building, we don't have those because they ran out of money partway through construction. So you can see a clear marking between the 1889 and the 1939 sides of the building. Another unique feature that we have is out on the exterior, and it is a segment of a lion, half of the British coat of arms, which is over this way, so we'll head over and have a look. This piece of work on the exterior of the building features a lion, which is half of the British coat of arms. The other half features a unicorn. This is a gift from the Parliament in Westminster. They were having a clear out of some of the old features of the building, and we were lucky enough to get a piece for the Parliament of South Australia. The other half of the coat of arms, the unicorn, is on the Parliament of South Africa. So we have a unique connection to the Parliament of South Africa through this coat of arms on the exterior of our building. Now that we've had a look at some of the features on the outside, we're going to head inside to Parliament House and have a look at our main entryway, Centre Hall. Thank you for coming inside. We're now in Centre Hall, which is the main entryway of Parliament House. And there are a number of special features in Centre Hall which we'll have a look at. The first one being up above our heads, we have the ceiling of Centre Hall, and that features a flat roof which is made to look like an optical illusion, to look like a dome. The original design intention was that there would be a dome and tower on top of Parliament House, but there wasn't enough money to build that feature. So we now have an optical illusion in our ceiling to make it look like it's a dome when it is actually flat. So it's a bit of an architectural quirk of the building. Another feature that we have in Centre Hall is the painting behind me. This is a picture of proclamation of South Australia, 1836, down at the old gum tree near Glenelg. So if you visited the old gum tree before, you might recognise its shape in the painting. And another special feature of this painting is the artist, Ivor Healy, who is a famed Australian war artist, and we're very lucky to have a piece of Ivor Healy's works in Parliament House. One of the quirks of Parliament House is that there are intentional mistakes throughout the precinct, because the prevailing belief at the time of construction was that only God could be perfect. We weren't allowed to have a perfect Parliament House. So one of the intentional mistakes is in Centre Hall, and it's in the ironwork that's above our main entry door. Throughout the ironwork, there are spirals, and the top row of spirals in the panel above the door is twisted the wrong way around compared to all of the other spirals in the balcony. So when you look at it quickly, you don't notice, but when you look at it closely, you can see that there's an intentional error, and we'll show you the others as we travel through the building. The final thing I'll point out in Centre Hall is a special piece of ironwork that has come from the UK Parliament. It's a grill, and it's a strange object to have featured inside a Parliament House, but it tells a very special story. So the woman in the picture and that this relates to is Muriel Matters, and she was born in Bowden, South Australia, and she grew up here seeing us become one of the first places in the world to give women the right to vote. So she moved to the UK to help campaign for women's voting rights in the UK, and she famously chained herself to the ladies' gallery in the House of Commons, which was made up of this grille. And the ladies' gallery was designed to almost obstruct women so that the members of the House of Commons couldn't see them. As she saw it as a symbol of women's oppression, she chained herself to it and became famous for being the first woman to speak in the House of Commons by yelling "Votes for women" down onto the floor of the chamber. So it's very unique that a South Australian woman was the first woman to have spoken in the House of Commons while chained to a piece of ironwork. And they couldn't detach her and her handcuff from the ironwork, so they had to take the piece of grill out with her still attached to it. She has many other achievements in the women's voting rights space, but we're quite privileged that we have this piece of House of Commons in our Parliament of South Australia. So now that you've seen some of the features in our main entry point of Parliament House, I'll take you through to explore the rest of the building, and we'll start in the old Parliament House section. So I'm now going to take you through to Old Parliament House, which is one of the oldest standing colonial structures that we have in South Australia. It was built in the 1840s, and it was designed to fit 8 members that we had in the original Legislative Council. And then over the years, there were a number of extensions that were done to the building, and it was finished in its current form in about 1855. And then it fit 24 members. I'll show you through to the old chamber, which has many of its original features, and then we'll have a look at what it's used for today. So follow me through to Old Parliament House. We've made our way into Old Parliament House, and now you are inside the old chamber, which is the original chamber where those 24 members of the Legislative Council in the 1850s would sit and make decisions for the colony. Over the 2 years following 1855, there was substantial reform in South Australia. So we changed from having one House of Parliament to 2 Houses of Parliament, and having the model that we've got these days where we've got 2 houses that check each other's work. So in the space of 2 years, the building that was designed to fit 8 and then 24 people suddenly had to fit 2 Houses of Parliament and all the additional staff that came along with that. So this space, once again, was too small for the number of people that needed to use it, and they had a design competition to come up with the new Parliament House, which we'll go back to shortly. These days, Old Parliament House is part of our parliamentary precinct, and it's used for things like parliamentary committee hearings where they sit and do inquiries, or we might have functions in here, or school students who come to visit and learn about how Parliament works. We're very lucky in that it has been beautifully preserved. So you can see a painting on the wall over here, and it's a painting of this room, in this room, and this is what it looked like in 1867. So in 1857, when we got our 2 Houses of Parliament, the Legislative Council that was working in here moved into a separate space of Old Parliament House, and the brand new House of Assembly moved in here. So that painting shows the House of Assembly sitting in 1867. And one of the unique things about this painting is that there's a painting inside of it, and that painting is still in the room today. So we've got that still featured in Old Parliament House. The colouring and the imagery and the furniture is almost all exactly the same. You can see in this room the features of a traditional parliamentary structure. So we have the gallery, the public gallery, where the people would be able to come and watch proceedings. And we also have the gallery at the other end for Hansard, which are the reporters that transcribe proceedings, and a space for the media as well. You can see a doorway, which is how they would have originally gained entry into that gallery. But after all of the renovations, that door actually goes to nowhere. So when you're on the other side of that wall, you simply see a door floating about halfway up the wall with no stairs connecting to it whatsoever. The chandeliers are quite special. They're very ornate and carved out of brass, and they were one of the first pieces of infrastructure in Adelaide that were connected to gas. So we had gas lighting in the old Parliament House chamber. And right up the front, you can see the original chairs that would have been used by the Speaker. So that's the person who chairs debate in the House of Assembly. and the President, the person who chairs the debate for the Legislative Council. Now, thinking back to our timeline, we've got 1857, we get 2 Houses of Parliament. The Legislative Council moves out, the House of Assembly comes in here. The new Parliament House is constructed, and when it was ready, the House of Assembly moved out, and then over the years, this room has been used for a range of different purposes. It was part of the parliamentary precinct for a while, but then it became a military recruitment venue, a dance hall, a constitutional museum, and in the 2000s, it was reclaimed as back part of the parliamentary precinct, and we use it to this day. What we're going to do next is make our way into New Parliament House so you can see where the House of Assembly moved to in the 1880s. We've made our way through Old Parliament House and now we're coming back into New Parliament House, and this corridor is at the front of the House of Assembly chamber. We'll have a look at the features here before we go and have a look at the chamber. So you'll notice that on either side of the chamber doors, we have some boards that showcase the different premiers of South Australia that we've had dating back to 1857. And then on the other side, we have speakers of the House of Assembly, also dating back to 1857. Along this corridor as well, we have different busts of former premiers of South Australia. So over here, we have Don Dunstan, who was famous for his social reform, and he was also known for some of his interesting attire that he would wear at Parliament House, but we like to focus on his reform for Aboriginal land rights, his focus on the arts, decriminalisation of homosexuality. We do sometimes joke and point out that he is the only Premier of South Australia to have published his own cookbook. So Don Dunstan's bust is a very popular feature with our visitors here at Parliament House. On this side, we have a bust of the Right Honourable Charles Cameron Kingston, and Kingston was the Premier of South Australia at the time that women got the right to vote in 1894. He was also deeply invested in the drafting of Australia's constitution, and he attended the constitutional conventions and helped frame the constitution for the country as we know it today. If we make our way along this corridor further, we've got a bust of Thomas Price. Thomas Price was a Premier of South Australia, but he was a stonemason before he became Premier, and he actually helped construct Parliament House. So we've had 2 stonemasons turned Premiers of South Australia, Tom Price and then also Frank Walsh. On this side here, we have Sir Thomas Playford. And Sir Thomas Playford was the longest serving Premier, not just in South Australia, but in the Commonwealth. He was Premier for nearly 27 years. And so a lot of our visitors here recognise Playford, or they pick up that we've got the city of Playford, lots of things in South Australia recognising his substantial contribution to the state. The other thing we have in this corridor are a set of the traditional speaker's robing and the wig with the jabot and collar. These are not worn day to day as much as they were traditionally, but we've got these on display because this outfit was purchased and picked for the speaker to wear when Queen Elizabeth came to visit in 1954. So these are a very special set of robes which were chosen for that occasion. Now that we've had a look at the features in the corridor here, we're going to make our way into the House of Assembly chamber and see where they sit today in 2025. All right, come on into the House of Assembly chamber and we'll have a look. So the House of Assembly chamber is one of the 2 chambers that we're going to explore in what we call New Parliament House. And I say new with a bit of a funny tone to it because it isn't exactly new. This part of Parliament House was constructed in the 1880s and opened in 1889. So after the building was finished, or this section of the building was finished, the House of Assembly moved out of Old Parliament House into here. And there was a lot of public money available when the House of Assembly was constructed. And you can tell that a lot was poured into the construction and styling of our House of Assembly chamber. South Australia was going through a copper boom. Copper mining brought in a lot of public funds in the 1880s, and so they filled our House of Assembly with beautiful ornate features which reflected the funding but also the Victorian era architecture, which was really ornate. That was the style at the time. So there are lots of features in here that show us some of the investment that was put into this place. So if you have a look, we've got these beautiful pillars on the walls, and then to be reflective of our connections to ancient Greece and the origins of democracy, but there are hand-carved angels on the top of each of the pillars. Around the cornices, there's real gold. That's gold leaf, and we have quite a bit of gold featured in our House of Assembly chamber. The chandeliers are hand-carved brass. So behind each globe, there's a face of a woman, and that's all been carved by hand. The ceiling is one of the most special parts of the House of Assembly chamber. It is spectacular and it's full of really ornate detail. But similar to what I was saying in Centre Hall, the prevailing belief at the time of construction was that only God could be perfect. So there is an intentional mistake, an error in the House of Assembly ceiling. So if we go to the chandelier up here and follow it all the way through to the roof, the panels that go around the chandelier, there are 4 rectangular leaf detailed panels, and the one that's closest to the back of the House of Assembly chamber is spun the wrong way around. They deliberately put a tile in the wrong way, and that was so that the ceiling couldn't be perfect. Despite this though, it is still a stunning reflection of the investment and the Victorian era architecture from the 1880s. Something else that is notable about our House of Assembly chamber is the colour and our furnishings. We've got Westminster traditions in the Parliament of South Australia, and we've drawn a lot of our symbolism and the look of our Parliament from the UK. It is traditional for lower houses of Parliament to be green, which comes from 2 different historical theories. One is that in medieval times, people used to meet for Parliament out on the village green, which was a patch of grass. So they made the rooms green to represent the grass where people would meet in medieval times. But the other theory is that when the Parliament in the UK finally moved into a physical location, the furniture happened to be green already anyway, so it was a nice coincidence. But either way, the tradition is that lower houses are green. And we've put a South Australian twist into our green lower house. And if you have a look at the carpet, we've got some particular symbols featured throughout. We have wheat and grapes, which reflect South Australia's major exports, being our wheat and our wine. And in the diamond, we have golden wattle, which is Australia's floral emblem, our national flower. The red line to the side has the Sturt Desert pea in there, which is South Australia's floral emblem. You can see a red line similar to this in the House of Commons, and it's a tradition that we have once again taken from the UK. And usually this is the one thing people remember if they've come for a visit to Parliament House. This red line is known as the bloodline. And the idea was that in medieval times, people would come to Parliament dressed in their most formal outfits, which would include a sword. And lots of people would recognise that politicians don't always get on, and there was a risk in medieval times that a debate could turn into a sword fight. So what they would do is mark a line on one side of the ground and the other that were at least 2.5 sword lengths apart from each other. So if you stood behind the line and you were to draw your sword would not be able to touch the sword of the person on the other side. Now, obviously, this is not a problem for us here in South Australia. We're very safe and we have great metal detectors, but we have this red bloodline as a symbol that we should respect each other while we're debating. We've just spoken about the colour and the history of our House of Assembly chamber, and now we're going to talk about its structure and who sits where. So the Parliament of South Australia has the House of Assembly with 47 members. There are 47 electoral districts in South Australia, and 1 person is voted in for each electoral district, meaning there are 47 members in our House of Assembly. These members come from different political parties, And the political party that has a majority of those 47 seats, so 24 or more, gets to form the government and become the government of South Australia. The government always sits to the right of the chair, so the government is always to this side of the room. And along the front bench on the government side, we have people that we call front benchers, which is a nickname that we give for ministers. They sit along the front bench. And ministers sit in what we call an order of precedence, their seniority within the party. So right up the front, we have the Premier's seat. And then next to the Premier, we have our Deputy Premier. And then the ministers sit along in sequence along our front bench here. On the benches at the back, we have what is nicknamed the backbench, the backbenchers, and they're politicians within the same political party, but they're not serving a ministerial role. Ministers have a tough job because not only are they completely responsible for their department, so here, Minister for Human Services, they're not only responsible for that portfolio, but they're still the elected representative for the electorate that voted them in. So they've got those dual responsibilities. Our backbenchers, they don't have a ministerial portfolio, but they're busy working hard in their community. We'll head on over to the opposition side of the chamber now. So the government with the majority is always to the right of the chair, and the opposition is the second largest party, and they sit to the left of the chair up the front. The opposition has two major roles. The first is to present an alternative for South Australians, what they would do if they were in power, but also they do a lot of work to scrutinise and ask questions of the government and make sure that the government isn't getting carried away with its power. So on the opposition benches, we have a front bench too, and along the front bench, we have different shadow ministers. So if there is a minister for health, there's a shadow minister for health, or a minister for education, a shadow minister for education. And they take on the responsibility of scrutinising those areas and asking the government questions. Right up the front, across from the Premier, if the Premier is the leader of the government, we have a leader of the opposition. Behind the leader of the opposition, on the benches at the back, we have our opposition backbenchers. So we've got our government, our opposition, and then we have other members in the House of Assembly who might come from different political parties, minor parties, or they could be independents, meaning that they don't have a party affiliation. And they sit on the curved benches that we have at the back of the chamber here. And we call these curved benches the cross bench. They vote whichever way they like. So we have a cluster of independents sitting on the cross bench here. And those are the core positions on the floor of the chamber. If we look up towards the top, the most important people sit up there, and that's the public, because Parliament belongs to the people of South Australia, and it's important they have access to it. So up the top, we have a public gallery, which is open every sitting day for the public to come in and watch proceedings, watch debate, so they can see how their representatives are working for them in this chamber. So we've had a look at where members sit on the floor of the chamber and where the public sits. Now we'll have a look at who sits in the other galleries in the House of Assembly. So up in the top, you'll see that there's a box with computers in it, and up there sits staff that we refer to as Hansard, and that's the Parliamentary Reporting Division. Hansard is a person's name, Thomas Curson Hansard, and he was one of the first printers to the House of Commons in the UK, and it became known that the reports of the Parliament were Hansard reports. So they sit up there and they transcribe everything that's being said in the Parliament. So if you can't come in and watch it live in person, you can read what's happened anytime, anywhere. It's an amazing service because if Parliament was sitting today, by 4 o'clock tomorrow, you would have a complete transcript of everything that's been said. So they are based in that central box. In the boxes on either side, we have media. So they can sit in the House of Assembly on a sitting day and report for the news, for newspapers, what's happening in the chambers. You'll see that just underneath the media galleries, we've got different flags. A lot of our visitors love to ask us what flags we have. We have the Australian flag and then the South Australian flag. And inside our chamber, we're very lucky that we have the Aboriginal flag and the Torres Strait Islander flag. And we were one of the first jurisdictions in Australia to put the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flags inside our parliament, not just on the outside. The chair up the top is the chair for what I like to tell our younger visitors, the most important person in the room, but that is the space for the speaker who chairs the debate and makes sure that everyone is following the rules and the procedures for the House of Assembly. The House of Assembly has its own rule book, and the rule book is called the Standing Orders, and they tell you who's allowed to speak and when and for how long, the different rules and procedures that they need to follow in here. And it's the Speaker's job to make sure that everybody is compliant and following these rules. We are quite unique in South Australia in that we have a requirement in our state constitution that the Speaker must be independent. So our current Speaker had to leave the political party that he belonged to, make himself an independent on the crossbench to be able to take that seat and chair the debate. There are a couple of other positions that I will point out at the table, and the table has clerks. The clerks are politically neutral employees of the Parliament who are here to support the Speaker and the House. The clerk that sits to this side here is responsible for overseeing the day-to-day work of the House of Assembly and is an expert on those standing orders so that they can give the Speaker advice. On the other side of the table, there is a deputy clerk that sits here, but it rotates throughout the day. There's another titled role that sits here. They've got a ceremonial title called the Sergeant at Arms. And if you recall, I mentioned before that in medieval times, members of Parliament had swords. And a long time ago, it was really dangerous to be a speaker. There was a risk that the members had swords and didn't like being told off or kicked out, and they might have tried to take issue with their swords with the speaker. And in fact, in medieval UK, there were multiple speaker beheadings. The Sergeant at Arms was a special guard that was in the chamber to protect the speaker and keep order and decorum in the place. So at the start of every sitting day, the Sergeant at Arms escorts the speaker in with the mace, which we will look at shortly. Now that we've had a look at all of the different spaces where people sit in the chamber, we'll talk about some of the portraits and the artwork that are featured in the House of Assembly. We've got portraits of different speakers. So we have a portrait of our longest serving speaker, so Robert Nichols, and he was speaker for an incredibly long time here at our Parliament of South Australia. We also have a portrait of Sir Friedrich Holder, and Friedrich Holder was a South Australian who went on to become the very first speaker for the brand new federal parliament in 1901. So the first speaker in our federal parliament was a South Australian. Some of the other portraits we have are former premiers of South Australia, and I did mention already Thomas Playford. Thomas Playford also has a portrait inside our House of Assembly chamber, recognising his service as the longest serving premier in the Commonwealth. The major pieces that end up being a point of conversation in the House of Assembly are our two tapestries. And these tapestries are a very special gift that we have in our chamber to commemorate women's voting rights and women's ability to run to be a member of Parliament. So the first tapestry that we have, we call Votes for Women, and it showcases an extract of a petition that was signed by over 11,500 men and women asking for women to get the right to vote. That petition was presented to the House of Assembly in 1894. It is phenomenal. The more you think about it, the more incredible the petition collation is, because it has signatures from Andamuka, from some really regional and remote parts of South Australia. How did they get that in 1894? So it showcases that incredible petition and the women who led the charge in getting those signatures. So it features Catherine Helen Spence, Mary Lee, and Elizabeth Webb Nichols, who worked to get those 11,500 signatures. We got voting rights for women in SA in 1894. We were one of the earliest places in the world to give women the right to vote. But what sets South Australia apart is we were the first place in the world to give women dual rights, being the right to vote and the right to run to be a member of parliament, both of which were given at the same time in 1894. So the tapestry on the other side of the House of Assembly is a reflection of women's achievements in the law since 1894. We got them in 1994 to commemorate 100 years. So this one showcases 100 years of women's achievements in the law since we got the right to vote and the right to run in 1894. You can see a silhouette of a female judge, and my favourite feature in this is the apron that says a woman's place is in the house, but it has a hand-stitched picture of Parliament House within that apron. Alongside the tapestry, we have a portrait of the first woman who was elected into the House of Assembly, which is Joyce Steele. She was elected to the House in 1959. So even though women were able to run to be a member of Parliament since 1894, it did take us until 1959 to get our first woman in the House. The first woman in a parliament in Australia was Edith Cowan, who was elected to the Parliament of Western Australia in 1921. What we're going to do now is go and explore the corridors adjacent to the House of Assembly and look at the other artworks and special features connected to the House of Assembly. Okay, we've had a look at the House of Assembly, and now we're going to come through and explore the Speaker's Corridor, which is a beautiful corridor in the House of Assembly's wing in Parliament House, and it features beautiful Italian marble tiles, which were uncovered during a recarpeting exercise. So they were hidden under carpet, the carpet was pulled up, and they discovered that there was beautiful tiled flooring underneath, so they were polished and preserved that we're able to look at them on tours and show our visitors the original look of Parliament House. The Speaker's Corridor has a number of different portraits, which we'll explore shortly, but I wanted to focus on this space here because here is where we have the mace, which is the symbol of the House of Assembly, and directly above it, we have a board featuring all of the different speakers we've had of the House of Assembly, and it goes backwards in time, right back to our first speaker. The mace is the symbol of the Speaker's authority and the symbol of a lower house of Parliament. And I mentioned the role of the Sergeant at Arms. It is the responsibility of the Sergeant at Arms to carry in the mace at the start of sitting day, and it is placed on the table in front of the Speaker to show that the Speaker has authority within the chamber. Our mace was a gift from the government of the day in 1957. We got it to celebrate 100 years of our representative responsible government from 1857. So the mace is gold plated and it is silver on the inside. It weighs just over 6 kilos and it features South Australian opals from Cooper Pedy as the state's gemstone. It also has royal seals on it. There's a royal seal for Queen Victoria, who was the monarch when we got our structure back in the 1800s. And then the royal seal for Queen Elizabeth, who was the monarch when we got the mace in 1957. It's engraved with wheat and grape motifs to follow on the symbolism that we saw in the chamber. And it's also engraved with speakers' signatures dating right back to 1857. So the mace is a beautiful object and it sits directly in front of the Speaker's office. So the symbol of the Speaker is positioned in the corridor directly in front of the Speaker's space. Some of the artwork that we have in here features former premiers of South Australia, but we also have a really special piece that I wanted to point out of Sir Douglas Nicholls. And Sir Douglas Nicholls was the first Aboriginal person to serve as a vice-regal representative, the Governor of South Australia. And Sir Douglas Nicholls has the Fitzroy Football Club logo on his jacket. So many football enthusiasts would be aware of the Sir Douglas Nicholls round of football, which was named after our former Governor of South Australia. So we'll make our way through the rest of the Speaker's corridor. So in addition to the Speaker's office, we'll go past where the Premier would be based on a sitting day. And then we're going to be around the back of the House of Assembly, where we'll be able to look at some of the features that are tucked away on a sitting day. You only get to see them when you come through on a tour of Parliament House on a non-sitting day. We'll be at the rear of the House of Assembly chamber. As we make our way to the back of the House of Assembly, you can see that we have Hansard volumes, so printed copies of the parliamentary reports, and we also have these beautiful stained glass windows that came from a firm in Melbourne, and people really love them because they stand out. They were actually part of a men's bathroom, and that whole space has now been turned into a dining room. As we continue through, we go past this wall, and the wall that we're about to go by was where the building was left unfinished for 50 years. I'll explain this in a bit more detail. So, at this space here, we've got images of the various stages of construction of Parliament House. And earlier in the tour, I mentioned that Parliament House was based on a winning design from a design contest. Here we have the winning design entry. This was the prize winning design for what Parliament House should look like, which was done by Edmund Wright and Lloyd Taylor. The state had an architect in chief, so this was the revised design, and it was toned down a little bit. We lost some of the towers on the side, and you can see the original intended dome and tower. So this is what they wanted, and this is what we got, which is half of Parliament House. This was the 1889 wing, which houses the House of Assembly. And this wall here on the picture is the wall that we walked past in the corridor just now. Everything from this side of the wall onwards was constructed in the 1930s, so it has Art Deco architectural styling, which was reflective of what was trendy in the 1930s, but also of the reduced funding. So you can clearly see our lost dome and tower. If you follow me through, we'll make our way past the Parliamentary Research Library, which is a private library that exists to serve the members of Parliament when they have research work that they need to do to represent their communities. They have a body of content available for the public to view, which we'll link to in this video so you can see the library's materials and objects in its collection. So this is our Parliamentary Research Library location. And now we're going to make our way into the Legislative Council, our upper house of Parliament. Follow me through. We've made our way through the back corridors of Parliament House, and now we're in the Legislative Council chamber, which is our upper house of Parliament and the second of the two chambers we're exploring in Parliament House today. I'll take you through and explain the colour, the history, who sits where and why. So first thing we'll do in here is have a look at the colour and the symbolism in the Legislative Council chamber. It's pretty distinct from the House of Assembly.
The Legislative Council is furnished in red, and to understand why, we look to the UK and the House of Lords, which is also furnished in red.
In medieval times, red was a very expensive colour pigment to produce. They would have to crush bugs to make a paste for the dye that they would use to dye all of the furnishings. Purple was a similarly expensive colour, so you will notice that red and purple were traditionally royal colours because they showed elevated status and rank. You would have to have a lot of money to be able to afford red furnishings. The House of Lords in the UK were people of elevated rank. They had land, money, and entitlements, and they got their spot in the House of Lords by hereditary title. So the red was used to symbolise the upper house, the upper classes. I like to think of it the way we roll out a red carpet for celebrities at an event. It's a similar sort of idea. We've put a South Australian twist to our red Legislative Council chamber, and that's by the Sturt Desert Pea, our state floral emblem, being featured throughout in the carpet. The other thing that's unique about our Legislative Council is how different it looks to the House of Assembly. So you can tell that this was built 50 years later because it reflects Art Deco styling, which is a lot more simple with clean lines and geometric shapes compared to that ornate Victorian era architecture in the House of Assembly. The way that this chamber was constructed was by way of donation, we were very lucky. They ran out of money after the build of the House of Assembly and left it unfinished for 50 years. They skipped the dome and tower, but in the 1930s,
There was a generous donation from John Langdon Bonython, who was editor of the Advertiser in the early 1900s. He was very wealthy and made a number of generous donations to South Australian institutions, including Parliament House. The Parliament received £100,000 from John Langdon Bonython to finish construction of the Legislative Council wing.
I say £100,000, and it doesn't sound like much, but translating that dollar figure from the 1930s into 2025, it shows that it was an enormous figure. It was about $67 million. So we finished this build, thank you to that generous donation, and the building was designed so it was much more clever and sophisticated in its thinking compared to the House of Assembly. The House of Assembly was beautiful, but it echoed really badly, and it wasn't really thought about for its function as a debating chamber. So in this chamber, they use soft wood, it's Queensland maple, and if you can see, the wooden panels curve inwards. So this room was designed to have perfect acoustics. It was designed to be a space where people would come to debate. They also had a ceiling filled with natural light so that there was plenty of light in this space, especially when our members of parliament work a really long day. So that's a bit of the colour and the setup and the architectural styling. Now let's have a look at who sits where in the Legislative Council. The Legislative Council is a bit different to the House of Assembly.
The House of Assembly has 47 members and they represent different electoral districts within South Australia.
The Legislative Council has 22 members and they don't have an electorate that they represent. They represent the whole state, which means all 22 politicians in here represent every single person in South Australia. So they have different positions in the chamber, but the theory of the layout is the same. So we have government members on the right side of the chair. So the government sits to this side of the room. There are ministers in our Legislative Council too. So we have ministers seated along the front bench and we have backbenchers. Then if we go to the other side of the chamber, we have the opposition and we have shadow ministers in here too. And they have different shadow portfolios and ask questions of the ministers in here. There are opposition backbenchers. And on the curved benches at the back, this is where we once again have our crossbench. And in the Legislative Council, they have a system called proportional representation, which means that minor parties and independents are able to get a seat more readily than they can in the House of Assembly. We haven't had a government with a majority in the Legislative Council since the 1970s. So this chamber, with its crossbench members, operates on a really strong check system for the House of Assembly. They check the work coming through from that majority government. So our crossbench is seated on these curved benches at the back. And then up the top, we have the public gallery for the public to come and visit the Legislative Council. We've had a look at the public gallery and the seating on the floor. Let's have a look at what we can see at this end of the Legislative Council chamber. There are a lot of similarities to the House of Assembly, but also some differences in terminology. So in the centre up the top where the computers are, we once again have our Hansard reporters who are transcribing the debates that are taking place in this chamber. On either side, we have the media galleries, so the media have space to report on what's happening in this House of Parliament. And in the chair up the top in this chamber, we don't call that person the Speaker, they're called the President. And the President of the Legislative Council is responsible for making sure that the rules of the Legislative Council are followed. And the Legislative Council has its own standing orders, the set of rules that apply to the members and the debate in this room. And they're different to the standing orders of the House of Assembly, which means that the President has support through a clerk who sits over here, and this clerk is an expert on the Legislative Council's standing orders, so they can provide advice to the President. Now, over to this side of the table, we have a different officer. And I mentioned in the House of Assembly, they had the Sergeant at Arms who would carry the mace. In here, this position is taken by the Deputy Clerk, but they also have the title of Usher of the Black Rod. And on the table is where we feature the Black Rod. The Black Rod is a symbol of the upper house and authority of the president. But traditionally in the House of Lords, the usher of the Black Rod would pass messages from the house to the monarch. And we got the position of the usher of the Black Rod in 1954 when Queen Elizabeth came to visit, so she could be properly received on the steps of Parliament House. The black rod is the staff or the gentleman's cane that would belong to that officer, the usher of the black rod, and they would stand in front of the monarch holding that object. On our black rod, we have some features that are South Australian. We have the piping shrike, which is the state's crest. We also have a crest of the Legislative Council, and it's fitted at the top with the crown. We have a lot of symbols of the crown and our connections to the British monarchy in our Legislative Council to reflect the fact that the House of Lords was traditionally for nobles and those connected to royalty. In addition to the crown on the top of the black rod, you can see the royal coat of arms with the lion and the unicorn on top of the president's chair. And that chair is actually a throne. So when Queen Elizabeth came to visit the Parliament in 1954, that was where she was seated for the opening of Parliament. You would have seen on the front of the building that we had half of that crest, the lion. Here you can see the complete crest being the lion and the unicorn. We've had a look at who sits where in the building and the two houses of Parliament, but it's really important for everyone to understand the functions of Parliament and what our Parliament is here to do. And our Parliament has four main jobs. The first is to be the place where you are represented. So every sitting day, members in the Legislative Council and the House of Assembly have time to talk about what's important to their communities, what's important to South Australians. They represent you. They might present a petition to the House, which is being collated by the public, or they might do a grievance or a matter of interest where they talk about how a road might need fixing or something that needs to be improved in a community. The second job of Parliament is to be the place where the government is scrutinised. So every sitting day, there is time for members to ask ministers questions about how they're running the public service. We call that question time or questions without notice because those ministers don't know what questions are going to be asked of them. We also have a questions on notice system where members can submit questions to ministers and they have to answer them later. The third job of Parliament is financial, and it's to be the place where the budget is approved each financial year. And the fourth job of Parliament is legislative. It's to be the place where South Australian laws are made or changed. And there are many ways the public can get involved in that, but particularly through parliamentary committees. Parliamentary committees might have a mixture of members from each house or members from a single house, but they will do an inquiry into a different topic and call for public comments and submissions. And it's really important the public contribute to these because it's a fantastic way to have your say and be part of the lawmaking process. We encourage you to do that and get in touch with your members of Parliament so their representation, scrutiny, financial supervision and lawmaking are informed by the people of South Australia. We've compared and contrasted the House of Assembly and the Legislative Council and looked at their differences. And now we're going to the final stop on our tour to have a look at some artwork in the Legislative Council's corridor. So follow me through and we'll have a look at the President's portraits. The corridor in the Legislative Council, which features the portraits of the different presidents we've had of the Legislative Council since 1857 through to modern times. The portraits move in chronological order, starting from the oldest portrait down this way, sweeping along the corridor down to the end and then back along the other side. And they're a really interesting exploration in portrait artistry because you can see in the older ones, you've got more full body shots compared to some of our newer ones where they're more head shots. What's unique about the president's portraits is that they're commissioned and paid for by the presidents themselves. and they have artistic control over what's featured in their portraits. So they choose different symbols or objects to go into their portraits, and it's become a tradition that they include these to show elements of their lives and achievements. So we have a wheat sheath that's featured in an artwork, some sheep shears, an Italian flag on a tie, union badges, pliers, and this portrait here includes different insects which have different meanings, including a ladybird for luck and a bee to represent his military service as a defender of the hive. One of the interesting things that has developed through the presidents choosing their own artists is that we have a collection of prominent artists and new and emerging artists. So we have presidents' portraits completed by Robert Hannaford and Ivor Healy, but also portraits by the husband of a sitting member of the Legislative Council. The portraits continue all the way along, and there are spaces left for future presidents for us to hang their portraits. And we're going to make our way back through to Centre Hall and our way out to the exit as we conclude our tour of Parliament House. Thank you so much for joining us on our tour of Parliament House today. We hope you learned something new and that you had the opportunity to take in one of Adelaide's really special, unique buildings. We hope that this has also inspired you to have your say, contribute, be a lawmaker and get in touch with your members of Parliament, because this place can only get better the more that the people of South Australia interact with it. Thanks for joining us.